Yeah, well, something's got has to be said about something has to be said about well, being forced to say something about transgender children, transgender teenagers. Well, largely because of these developments in Canada, particularly where. Well, Canada's more. Well, they're going ahead with this LGBT whatever agenda, and recently there's been a university kind of actually lost a case in the Supreme Court, High Court, where they said they weren't permitted. They said that the Bar Association of Canada was justified in not accrediting their law school because they had a Christian a Christian ethos and a Christian covenant. Now, the complexities of that case aside, and a lot of people, a lot of critics of Israel Folau, for example, they've been dragging out this argument that basically Christians talking about the evils of homosexuality are threatening, are risking the lives of vulnerable transgender teens, and they're somehow. Well, the imputation is that somehow, we're talking about hellfire, these transgender teens are going to kill themselves. And somehow the fault of Christians or the fault of judgmental religious organizations. Now, that is a bit scurrilous. It's the usual scurrilousness from the LGBT activists. Like those arguments have been completely debunked. The Dutch paradox that the more you promote and liberate people into transgender and gay lifestyles, the more prone they are to suicide. Anyway, my point is, I think we're being falsely accused. Christians are being falsely accused. And I think largely so they can ignore the real culprit. So the real culprit can escape in the confusion. And really it's the same old Platonism. It's the Platonic religion, again. Because Platonism, the Greeks got ultimately the Babylonian religion from the Sidonians, basically the Phoenicians, and well, they were actually Phoenicians. The Phoenicians got it from Babylon, and there's a handful of doctrines you see now. Platonism is famous for these theories of the innate, what John Locke called innate notions. That is to say, people are born with ideas. Now, modern pop psychology talks about innate tendencies, genetic tendencies. And the Platonists would talk about how people would be things like there's these mystical eternal forms from heaven, or like the perfect sphere and the perfect square and the perfect triangle. And things like Pythagoras' theorem were these pre-existent eternal truths, and somehow a mathematician in Babylon or South America or China who rediscovers this is somehow just rediscovering something that's innate in them. And this is, this idea of innate notions is a great big grab bag of ideas that are sort of passed off under this umbrella, like reincarnation and past lives. People have tendencies to do certain things because they did so in a past life. Or now people have certain tendencies to do certain things because of there are a certain tribe that does those things, or that's inherent in their genes. And John Locke, the philosopher, 17th century, he actually, ironically enough, he's the architect of toleration and religious toleration. And he wrote his famous letter concerning toleration in the midst of religious wars, and the famous wars between the Roundheads and the Royalists in the days of Cromwell. And the thing about toleration was toleration to other people's religious ideas was regarded as a virtue. But he made the point that this by no means follows that any particular religious idea can be regarded as inherently inviolable and true. Now, so, yeah, well, John Locke is appealed to, and the spirit of toleration has become strangely become some kind of standard in Western society, where toleration is, well, it's a virtue. It's gone from being a virtue to being some kind of an absolute law, which is crazy because it's inherently relative. Toleration inherently recognizes that there's people with differing irreconcilable opinions. Now, but the gay lobby have basically used pop psychology and pseudoscience to tell everyone that people are born gay. People who people are born gay, they're not made gay, and people who are transgenderism is just a mere extension of that. You have people who are actually women trapped in a man's body or something, but this whole idea of the eternal forms, that they are pre-existently, even if they look male, they're pre-existently female or something. Now, that is religion. Okay, there's no evidence at all for scientific evidence of any kind for race memories or past lives or pre-existent ideas in people's heads. I mean, it's crazy. If there was pre-existent ideas in people's heads, why did the Babylonians had a base 60 system of numerals, and the Mayans and the Aztecs had a base 7? I mean, they invent what they need, and they're not the same, because the idea of mathematics is not inherent in the human nature. It's just invented. As, and there's this logical fallacy trying to say that language and the facility for language are inherent in the genes, but that's very vague speech. Very, very, very vague speech. And every different tribe speaks a different language. But human beings find it quite easy to adopt a new language. But there's no evidence. I mean, there is no scientific evidence of of pre-existent ideas in mankind, but they just offer a logical fallacy. Well, there are enduring institutions that endure from generation to generation, like language. Languages are public institutions. And a lot of bodies of scientific knowledge, or religious, or even philosophical knowledge. To put it mildly, these are public institutions that are just edifices that have been created over generations. Now, that doesn't mean that they're inherent in someone's genes. I mean, that's just silly. I mean, that's a circular argument to say, well, if the English language was inherent to an English child, he would speak English like his father. Perhaps he speaks English like his father. Therefore, English is inherent in the English genes of an Englishman, which is nonsense, because it's just that the good old Jesuit logical circular argument. He speaks English, therefore English is inherent in his genes. And we get a whole vast edifice of pseudoscience at universities talking about, in this locus, in this area, talking about, like philosophical, people talk about philosophical necessity and philosophical compulsion. Now, this whole false dichotomy between randomness and predeterminism is of that ilk. But you see, we have, as usual, like in Darwinism, like in climate science, we have religious ideas passed off as science for quite obvious political, financial motives. Such things have happened before. Now, we have religious ideas. The idea that people are inherently gay or inherently trans or something. But what if you had an ordinary kid who gets molested by a Catholic priest or a child member or a trusted member of the family or something, and they get confused about their sexuality as a result, and because homosexuality is learned behaviour, but then along comes some evil counselor who tells them that these strange feelings are inherent in their genes or something, they're born that way, or they did something in past life, or imagine that. I mean, that is beyond cruel. It doesn't even bother to be cruel, it's just callous. So, I mean, I can quite imagine an ordinary guy finding himself with strange feelings and being told by some respected elder that they were just born that way. I can understand why they'd want to kill themselves. That'd be a pretty strong reaction. So I mean, it's a much more complicated situation than the gay and trans activists are making it out to be. They're just saying that Christians are meanies who are picking on poor, vulnerable teenagers. Now that's actually just the usual monstrosities you get from those people. And trying to use the law to prevent people from trying to actually restore damaged children to health and sanity and making against the law. I mean, these people are they working for brothels? Are they working for people who make porno films? Are they just trying to recruit more fresh flesh for the porno industry, or the just more drug addicts and heroin addicts and I mean, it's like, but at the same time, we're being told that Christians who are trying to ameliorate the situation are the worst kind of evil people. Now, turns out that there's a real irony that John Locke basically was one of the famous advocates of religious tolerance. He spent a great deal of his life opposing, contradicting. He wrote lots of essays disproving this idea of innate notions, the idea that somebody could have ideas from before they were born. And he proved it at great length, especially one of his famous essays on human understanding. So the popular stance, the PR stance of the gay lobby and the trans lobby saying we should have sympathy for homosexuals because they can't help it, but they're born that way. We should tolerate them. You are invoking John Locke in vain. I mean, John Locke condemns you. John Locke would now not agree with you at all. He would vehemently disagree with everything you say. Now, people are always trying to talk about, invoke tolerance, and beautiful, peaceful Western tolerance, but they don't mention that John Locke thought that it was impossible that anything like somebody being born gay could exist. And that's, I mean, amongst other things, that's one example where Western society has been sold a complete falsehood. Well, again, but anyway.